Hi there. Do you ever feel stuck in a rut creatively, or worry that you're not a real photographer? Well, feelings of fraud or imposter syndrome are common amongst photographers, and it drives people sometimes to avoid looking for inspiration for fear of copying others, which in turn then drives them into that creative rut even deeper. And then they put that camera away for a long time without ever getting it out again. And we want to try and avoid that. So I'm going to share with you how I find inspiration for photography without fear of either copying others or being a fraud. So a couple of problems exist with the way that people approach finding inspiration. Either they don't know where to look for it, or they end up comparing the photo that's supposed to be inspiring them with their photography, and they worry that they can't achieve it. So what's my mindset and where do I look for inspiration? So firstly, I know inspiration isn't about comparison. It's not about whether their photo is better than mine or my photo is better than theirs. It's about ideas. It's about being mentally stimulated to feel something, or even better, stimulated to do something. It's about finding that motivation. So I try and find a photo of someone else's that interests me every single day. And it doesn't have to be a magnificent, extraordinary photo. You can even find inspiration from bad photography. I've seen poor photos of incredible subjects that has inspired me to go out and find that subject. It might be that someone who's not particularly skilled with a camera knows something I don't about where to find a subject or how to get close to that subject. And so you can find inspiration from bad photography as much as you can from great photography. But if you do find a phenomenal photo, don't just head out and try and recreate it. You need to take the mental stimulation from it that you can. You need to ask yourself why it is that you liked that photo. What is it that's drawn you in and captured your attention? It might be something that you like about the lighting. It might be something about the colours. It might be something interesting about the composition that you've not tried before. It could be something about the subject's behaviour that you've not seen before. It could be any number of things. But unless you properly analyse that photo and understand why you like it, what it is that's interested you, you can't be consciously, mentally stimulated to the point that you find inspiration to get out there and do something, to find that inspiration and learn how you could use the skills that other person has done in a different situation. One thing you should be doing if you want to be inspired and to grow as a photographer is to consume photography more generally. I follow all sorts of photographers, not just nature and wildlife photographers. I consume photography online, through magazines, through books and all sorts of places. And I often find the photography that inspires me the most is that from photographers in other genres. When you start to see the photography of wedding photographers, portrait photographers, food photographers, sports photographers, street photographers, all sorts of things, you can start to understand the different approaches that they have. And they will often approach things quite differently to the way that we are taught to do wildlife photography. And those different approaches will give you a lot of food for thought about your photography, the way you approach it, and what you want to achieve. Whilst all of those genres are distinctly different and photograph distinctly different subject matter, the photographers operate under remarkably similar situations to those of wildlife and nature photographers. The wedding photographer operates under a one-take scenario situation. So just as we can't approach the bird or animal we're photographing and say, "Could you just do that again? I'd like to get a better shot." They can't approach the bride and groom and say, "Could you just cut that cake again for the first time?" Or, "Could you just do the first dance again?" No, they have to nail it first time, every time, just like us. And the portrait photographer is constantly trying to manage the light, just like we are, particularly if you find portrait photographers who operate with natural light. Sports photographers are constantly photographing fast-moving action, just in the same way that we do when we're photographing wildlife in motion. And I've learned such a lot from the photography of food photographers. There are some remarkable similarities between that and macro photography, and that has really helped shape my approach on occasions. So let me give you a few examples of that now. So let's start with wedding photography. And there are many subgenres of wedding photography, but in particular the photojournalistic style, where they capture moments in a candid way, is where the photographer cannot ask for those moments to be repeated. An editorial style wedding photographer will probably take more posed photos. So just like a wildlife photographer has to be ready for anything to capture a moment, so does a wedding photographer. And there are a few things I've learned from wedding photographers, one of which is about the anticipation of moments, predicting what might happen and when, and being ready for it. And after thinking about this approach, I often now choose a scene and wait for wildlife to move into it. One example is this photo of a grey wagtail, where in the video about making the photo, I described my process of how I chose the scene and sat and waited for the bird to turn up. There's a link to that video and others that I'll mention in the description of this video. One other example of this approach is this photo where I'd spotted a V shape in the clifftop grasses and I just waited for birds to fly into it, in this case, gannets. But wedding photographers also have to capture fleeting moments that don't last very long. So do we, such as, for example, this rainbow. Rainbows usually disappear in a matter of minutes. In one section of my video on tips for unexpected weather, I show you how to predict where a rainbow will be to give yourself the best chance of capturing one. Another fleeting moment from the same video meant that I captured a sunrise scene that included both blue hour and golden hour elements in the same photo. Now that is something that when you see it, doesn't happen very long. Next, let's talk about what I've taken from sports photography. And like us, sports photographers often need to capture fast-moving action. I've mentioned before that I believe most photography exists on a spectrum from pure documentary at one end to pure art at the other end of the scale. And just like wildlife photography, sports photography started out as pure documentary, such as this lacrosse photo. But also, just like wildlife photography, sports photographers have become more artistic as time has gone on. Whether that is by using different techniques like slow shutter speed to get some motion blur behind this moving motorbike, or by visualizing and planning for the photo that you want to take. And I use this visualizing and planning technique regularly. In my video on photographing flocks of birds, I was photographing at a huge estuary that's home to something like 500,000 birds. And they can take off and fly around in huge formations of thousands or even tens of thousands of birds. So, as well as getting the standard photos that show off this spectacle, I wanted to capture something a little more artistic, which includes this photo showing some of the chaos using a slow shutter speed technique. And you can get a sense of each bird in the picture, but it's more calm than if I'd frozen the action in time, and it feels much more like the aesthetic qualities of a painting than a photograph. And in terms of that planning and visualizing a shot, in the video, The Power of a Test Shot, I show you how I arrived at this photo through visualizing, thinking, patience, and using test shots. Sports photographers are increasingly looking to take shots from unusual angles that a sports spectator wouldn't see if they were at the event, which often means overhead shots. During the Olympics this past summer, I saw some incredible photos looking down on divers from above, which a spectator would not see sat around the pool. I now also look for opportunities to photograph birds from angles that people wouldn't normally see, such as from above. Most of the time, people see birds looking up at them in the sky. And getting a photo of a bird looking down on it takes some planning, thought, and knowing where you can go to do something like that. Moving on to portrait photography, there's a lot you can learn. Remember that a lot of what we do in wildlife photography is taking portrait photographs. It's just that we have non-human subjects. In the world of natural light portraiture, one of the common tricks is using windows or a door frame to shape and frame the light. Take a look at this, for example. Having the model so close to the window makes sure her face is lighted well, whilst it also frames her. On the left side, we've got the window frame in darkness, and on the right side, we've got the dark room behind her. And it brings focus to the model's face by doing that. And here, the light and contrast on the model is shaped by the use of a door frame. The light is coming in from the right, lighting the model on that side, with much less reflected light from the door frame on the left, and that creates contrast across the model's face. So what can we as nature photographers learn from this? We don't have door frames and windows to work with. Or do we? Well, there are occasions that you can photograph birds in that type of situation, and this is one of my favourite swallow portraits. Photographing wildlife in and around farm buildings, like a barn, or in buildings around nature reserves, for example, the opening hatch in a wildlife watching hide. Even in the doorways and windows of your garden shed, it's possible to photograph wildlife there. But beyond that, we can also shape the light in other ways. We can use the dappled light under the cover of trees to create contrast, such as with this rabbit, and you can see this in my video on Get Out Early, Go Home Late. And if we choose to photograph a subject when it moves into a brighter area under that tree canopy, surrounding them with darkness in the less bright areas, that is the equivalent of shaping the light with a door or window frame. Portrait photographers are also much more willing to photograph subjects without a straight horizon behind them. Not just an accidentally wonky horizon, but one that is deliberately tilted by as much as 30 to 45 degrees. And that is called a Dutch angle, and it can be used to create drama. We nature photographers are taught to always ensure we have straight horizons. But should we? In recent times, I've been experimenting with Dutch angles a lot more, and I certainly think it provides an opportunity to create drama in wildlife photography too. And I'll cover that in a lot more detail another time. Another trick portrait photographers employ is to use studio lighting and flashes to create well-lit subjects with darkened backgrounds. And there are many ways to achieve this effect, but I've used it a lot in my flower photography. Here you can see a well-lit flower head illuminated by a flash, whilst allowing the background to drift off into darkness. It's an effect I really like, particularly in black and white such as this. But it also works in colour too, so there's a lot we can learn about and be inspired by from portrait photographers. Food photography has given me quite a bit of inspiration over the years, and there are lots of ways that we can approach photographing food, and a lot we can learn from food photographers. So let me give you some examples. So one of the common things that food photographers do is to dress the scene, which just means creating a scene with some accompanying elements, such as in this example of macarons that have been dressed with some flowers and a cup of tea. We can find ways to dress scenes too, such as this example of a candle larkspur flower. I've pulled in two other plants close together to frame the subject plant in the background. Often, food photographers will dress the scene with the ingredients that went into the dish that they're photographing, or with other dishes that might accompany the main dish. But these dressings can all look a little bit too perfect at times. And one particular food photographer really created an impression on me when he said he always aims to create a scene that is not quite perfect. His rationale was that the viewer should be able to imagine themselves eating the dish in real life, such as this cake. It's on a table that's slightly scratched, and you can see parts of the room in the background. It's not quite a perfect picture, but he argues that it makes you much more likely to want to eat it because it looks realistic than to eat something like this, which is not from a realistic scene. He also argues that you can still create an attractive photo even though things look realistically messy. This ice cream scoop is an attractive photo, but it's slightly messy with all those sprinkles, and you can almost imagine your kids having made that mess with the sprinkles. Or this kitchen scene with objects that are not perfectly placed. It makes you feel like you could be in your own kitchen. Looking at this photo, you would feel the food is homemade and want to eat it because of that. Whereas this photo is much more likely to make you think it's manufactured food. And his approach was eye-opening for me, because I feel like a lot of close-up and macro photography nowadays is a little bit too perfect and unnaturally perfect. And that's because people do things like take out pre-printed scenes to put as backgrounds behind subjects. But for me, you might as well have shot them in the studio. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that, it's just not for me. So with my mushroom photography, I still do dress the scene, but I always aim to make it that little bit more natural and that little bit less perfect. With both these photos, I've created scenes with things that are from the forest floor, but I hope they feel like you could encounter them in real life. So now street photography, and there are so many styles of street photography, it would be almost impossible not to be inspired if you dive into it. But street photography also exists along a spectrum of pure documentary to pure art, and there is a particular subgenre of street photography that concerns itself with simplicity. It's almost minimalist, but not quite lacking enough detail to be truly minimalist. It's often about the relationship between the person in the photograph and other elements of the scene, or in their interactions with shapes in the scene. But these types of photos have inspired me and made me much more comfortable with simplicity. I actively look for situations now where I can create simplicity. It doesn't have to be properly minimalist. There needs to be some kind of reduction in complexity to create this more light touch aesthetic. And it also creates some variety for me with my other photographs, where my style is predominantly about creating depth and layering in my photographs. And sometimes a little bit of variety is all you need. Something to keep you on your toes, to match your mood, or inspire you to feel something or do something differently. Another thing I would recommend, particularly for those of you who are a little bit more experienced, is to consume art, visual art, more generally than just photography. People forget that photography is a visual art form and a relatively new visual art form. But a lot of the techniques that we use, particularly the compositional techniques, were all derived from visual art. You don't think, do you, that the rule of thirds or the golden ratio, things like that, were invented by photographers? No, they came from artists. And in the last couple of years, I've been particularly paying more attention to art and what I can learn from it. From the Renaissance period right through to the Romantic era, I think there's a lot of learning that you can take from art. And so I would recommend go out there, look at it, analyse it in the same way that you would a photo. And it will give you ideas because those artists, again, they approached things from a different way than photographers do nowadays. But it might give you some inspiration. It will certainly give you some learning. One other thing I love to do to get inspiration is go to a photography gallery. And it used to be that if you wanted to see photography in a gallery, you'd have to go to a major city like London. But not nowadays. Photography exhibitions are everywhere. And for example, if you're here in the UK, the Wildlife Photographer of the Year exhibition happens every year at the Natural History Museum in London. But it also goes out across the country. I've seen it in both Yorkshire and in Dorset. But beyond those kind of major exhibitions, there are often other local exhibitions. As I travel around the country, I will often see that there's an exhibition of a local wildlife photographer or landscape photographer, sometimes at village halls, sometimes at the visitor centre of nature reserves, places like that. But you need to search for it. You need to find it. Go and look online at your local What's On guide or in local newspapers, and I'm sure you will find there's a lot more happening near to you than you would realise otherwise. But it's a great thing to do. I will always buy a ticket and go into those things if I've got the time, because I take inspiration from it. And not only that, you're supporting somebody else within the photography community. So these are the ways I go about finding inspiration for my photography. And sometimes inspiration can sneak up on you from out of nowhere, but more often than not, you have to go looking for it. And what you take from that visual stimulation from the things that you see will give you inspiration in a way that's unique to you. And you can source that visual inspiration and stimulation in a variety of places. So let me know, how do you find inspiration for your photography? Drop me a note in the comments below. But if you're looking for more inspiration here on YouTube, you might like to check out this video on creative uses of negative space. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.